Why does just about every man in this room, I'm willing to bet, want to be able to exude that kind of confidence, that kind of strength, that kind of notion that if something went wrong, that's the guy that's going to bring order to chaos? Why do we want that? Because right now in this culture, we have a lot of people in academia, in Hollywood, and pretty much everywhere else you can think of telling young men, you're not supposed to want that. That's bad, that's toxic, that's violent, that's aggressive, that's too competitive. That's the problem. You're the problem. And yet, there is something inside us that knows that's wrong. Now, I knew from a very young age I wanted to do that. So what did I do? I decided I was going to go to the military. I met my wife in high school, but I actually left for infantry training before we got married. So I went to infantry training. I went to airborne school. I ended up in the 82nd Airborne Division. I ended up coming home. I asked my wife to marry her, and we got married just a little less than a year out of high school, 19 and 20. I have my beautiful bride, and I understand that I have a responsibility as a husband. My job is to protect and to provide. I believe this. And so I'm going through every possible school I can within the military, chasing this idea of wanting to be the sort of man that she knows can protect her. So I'm going to air assault school, I'm going to sniper school, I'm going to ranger school. We end up getting stationed in Hawaii, 9/11 happens. I volunteer for Army Special Forces, Green Berets, I go to that. And I can tell you right now, at that point, by the time I went over to Iraq, I felt incredibly prepared to what I needed to do in combat situations over there. But I will never forget being on my second tour in Iraq in 2008. Out of all the missions we'd ever gone on, there was only one time where I really thought, I'm about to die. And the reason for that is because we had moved on to this objective, and it wasn't supposed to be a combat operation. We were just supposed to talk to some people, and then all of a sudden an explosion goes off. 2 of my Iraqi militia guys are down. There's 6 Green Berets, about 25 Iraqi Army, about 25 Iraqi militia. So we go around, we set up our perimeter. We're right on the Tigris River. And Iraq looks like Nevada until you get to the Tigris, and then it's all lush and you can't see anything. And I can remember getting to this point where we had secured the perimeter. I knew this guy had not gotten outside of the perimeter because we had Apache gunships running up and down the Tigris. I knew he hadn't gotten away, and yet I can't find him, and I'm furious because 2 of my guys are down, and you're going to pay a price for that. And then all of a sudden, I see this little foot trail, and I'm sitting there, and we look down, and again, it's thick, it's lush. We just see this narrow little trail and an opening, and it's a little hole in the ground, and I know that's where this guy's got to be. And the difference between that moment and every other moment up until that point is I had a lot of time to think about it. And here I am, right? I've been through all the training. I've been through combat operations. I'm confident that I'm that guy. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, I'm never going to see my wife and kids again. In that moment right there, just that little moment, cowardice started to creep in. Of course, I owe it to my wife and children, right, to make sure that I get out of here alive. Maybe somebody else can jump in the hole. And I vividly remember thinking at that moment, my wife is at home right now with my children, telling them I am a good man, that I will protect them. And so at that point, you have a choice to make. You're either going to jump or you're going to be a coward. You are either going to be the sort of person that your wife and your children think you are, or you're going to make fools of them. What good is having the capability to do the things that as men we know we want to do, we know we ought to do, if we don't understand the purpose for why we have both the desire and the drive to develop the capability? Ladies and gentlemen, we are increasingly told, men and women, that we don't need each other. I am here to tell you we do. To the ladies in the room, I'm going to tell you this right now. You're not responsible for turning us into good men, but I will tell you what, you have the ability to inspire us in a way that nobody else can. Going through that process of embracing that role, being a husband, being a father, understand what it means to be responsible, to protect and to provide, drives us because God made it that way. So to the men in the room, I'm going to tell you, everybody that's telling you right now to try to suppress those instincts, they're lying to you. You're supposed to develop them. You're supposed to be strong. You're supposed to be a man of God. If you want to attract the sort of woman that you're going to build a relationship with, then start working on yourself to be the sort of man that she'll be attracted to. Develop those skills. You don't got to ask permission, and you sure as hell don't got to listen to the people that are telling you that it's toxic. So ladies, I want to make something clear because I think this is important. Because at the same time that they're telling men to completely abandon or reject the very things that God has put in us to develop for his purposes in service to something good and noble, they're also telling you to reject one of the greatest gifts you've ever been given, and that is to share in the most intimate way possible the creation of human life. What kind of a sick, perverse society tells young women that the very gift of being able to foster and protect human life is standing in the way of their dreams, hopes, and ambitions? How do we win? How do we take back our culture? How do we as men recognize our role in this fight? How do we continue to develop ourselves spiritually, physically, intellectually, emotionally, professionally, to be the sort of men God called you to be? Because I'll tell you this much, if you want femininity to be able to flourish, it needs to be protected by masculinity, which understands its proper role to protect it. I loved what Mr. Squires had to say about putting things within the proper order. And I want to say two things here. I want to talk about the ideal, but I also want to talk about redemption. Because the ideal is that you do wait, you save yourself for that person. I'll never forget the first time my oldest daughter, who's about to get married in June, she was in 5th grade, and she tells her mother that she likes a boy and that a boy likes her. And she says, "Well, have you told Daddy?" And she goes, "Well, I don't know if I want to tell Daddy." Because again, Daddy has tried to develop this persona of intimidation for anybody that could potentially come next to one of my little girls. And at this point, I'm kind of overhearing the conversation, and so I know what's coming. And I remember praying about this in that moment. I'm like, God, I don't want to screw this up. Because if she comes up to me and she says, "I like a boy," and I say, "Who is he? What's his address? I'm going to kill him," right? Like, then what I've just taught her in that moment is that she can't come to me with things. She can't share things with me that I really want her to be able to share with me, especially when she gets old enough to start making really, really important decisions that are going to affect her entire future. Will I be the sort of father that she trusts to calmly, coolly give her advice, offer my insight, assured that it comes from a place of love and tenderness and knowing that I'm always on her side? So I remember telling her, I said, "Sweetheart, who's this little boy?" So already she's a little bit nervous, right? I'm asking for data. She gives me his name. I said, "What did you tell him?" She said, "Well, I told him I'm not allowed to date till I'm 18. That was a rule we had for all of our kids, actually." I said, "What did he say?" He said he'd wait. I'm like, all right. I said, "That's very sweet. He sounds like a nice young gentleman. And sweetheart, the fact that he likes you, the fact that he sees something in you tells me a lot about his judgment, right? Because you do deserve someone that likes and respects you." I said, "Do you know why we tell you you can't date until you're 18? And she goes, "Yeah." She goes, "Because dating is about marriage. It's not about just having fun." I said, that is part of it, sweetheart. So, but what this really comes down to is that I want you to have what your mommy and I have. I want you to have the sort of relationship that is filled of love and respect and trust and, yes, passion. One day, I want you to meet that young man that God has for you. And I'm going to say yes in that moment because I want you to have all of those things. The thing I want you to consider is when you meet him, when you're in love, when you find the one you want to spend the rest of your life with, how much do you want to have to explain to him? This was a conversation that I had in one form or another with all of my children. My son too, because one of the things that frustrated me so much about some of my friends in the military is that when they were instructing their daughters, the whole idea was nobody better touch my daughter. She better be home by 10, no boys. But when it was their sons, it was, well, go out and have a good time, just wear a condom. There is nothing more absurd than raising your son to be the sort of man you tell your daughters to avoid. So for all of our children, it was this idea of here's the ideal, and the reason why it's the ideal is not because we're trying to keep you from having fun or experiencing something, but because there is something so much better, so much more pure, so much more rich that you can experience and experience fully, and we want that for you. We desperately want that for you. Now, there are some people that are inevitably going to hear that and say, I already screwed up. We all have in one way or another. That's why we have a Savior. That's why there's such a thing as redemption. One of the most beautiful things about this movement is that we had a close friend group for a while. Within that same friend group was a woman that had had 3 abortions and a woman that was an abortion survivor. And the healing that took place with those 2 people being able to discuss and embrace one another and recognize the beauty of life and redemption at the same time was absolutely critical. So I want you to understand something. If it hasn't been ideal for you up to this point, if you've made decisions that you regret, one of the key things to remember about what we believe in the pro-life movement, what we believe as men and women of faith, is that there is such a thing as redemption and forgiveness and restoration. I said something the other night that was probably a little bit, we'll say, bold. And that was, I think we can win this whole fight in one generation. And here's why. We're the ones having the babies. Now, when it comes to elections, when it comes to pop culture, numbers matter. Numbers matter, and we're the ones having the kids. So here's my question. Why haven't we already won? Some of it may have something to do with the fact that we have our kids and then we hand them off to government institutions to educate the faith, the pro-life tendencies, the values right out of them. One of the things I always tell the parents is that if you have not fully explained why it is that we believe these things, if you've just told your kids what to believe without actually providing them the tools that they need to have the same conviction that you do, then you haven't taught them what you believed. What you've taught them is an authority structure. And the authority structure is do what I say, because there's benefits for obedience and there's consequences for rebellion. The problem is that when they go off to school and when they go off to college, all of a sudden, mom, dad, you're not the authority figure anymore. The college professor is. And so we have to recognize our responsibility as fathers, as mothers, to truly explain and articulate why this means so much to us, why this is so fundamental. Why when certain politicians who are presumably on our side say, well, we can't really address this issue, it's too hot, why don't we just focus on taxes or property rights or something else? I'll tell you why. Because the first and most fundamental right of all existence is the right to life, and if you don't have that, the other ones become really, really hard to appreciate. So make sure that when you do it right, when you get married, when you start to have kids, understand that that's the first part of this equation, but the second part is actually instilling your values in them in a way that they understand and allows them to make them their own. The other thing I want to tell the men in this room, do you think the people that are telling you to sit down and shut up about this issue are doing so because you have no power or because you do? I will tell you right now, you can read the studies, you can read the statistics, you can read the surveys. When you ask a young woman in duress why she's having an abortion, the number one answer is she feels pressure either from the father of the child or her parents. When that father decides that regardless of the circumstances, he's going to step up and be there for her, either as a husband, but at least as a father, as someone that is going to protect and provide, more often than not, she chooses to keep the baby. So for the young men that like to show up for the fun part, and then all of a sudden, when something unanticipated happened, although you shouldn't be shocked, if you're the sort of guy in that moment that then goes, well, hey, look, I'm a feminist. This is your body, your choice. Let me tell you what you actually are. You're the lowest form of male human life. Because what kind of a man idly stands by and allows his child to be destroyed because he failed to stand up and said, I will be there to do my job? So I'm going to tell you right now, the reason why they're telling men to shut up on this issue is because they know the amount of power that you actually have if you do this correctly, if you conduct yourself with honor, if you develop the sort of attributes and characteristics that you need to be the sort of man that can protect and provide. That is one of the most dangerous things to their agenda. They need you to be weak. They need you to be quiet. They need you to be docile. We need you to be dangerous. Not to your wife, not to your children. But we need you to possess the sort of capability to where you stand up and you say, no. No, I'm not going to accept an environment, a society, a civilization, if you can even call it that allows for innocent life to be destroyed for convenience. I'm not going to allow it. I'm not going to shut up. I'm not going to be silent. You'll be shocked at the response you get. And again, for the young women in the room, I'm going to tell you this. Like I said before, it's not your job to turn us into good men. That's our obligation. That's our duty. But please never underestimate the incredible power that you have to inspire. Because, look, I love my country. I love the people I was serving with. But the reason why I jumped in that hole is because I wanted to be who that woman believed I was. And if you want to be the sort of generation that takes back this culture, then the way you're going to do it is not just by having a good argument for what you believe, although that's important. It's not going to just be by lobbying the government in order to make better laws in order to protect the innocent and the unborn, although that's important. We have an entire generation of people that have been lied to, and slowly but surely they are waking up to that fact. And it is going to be an incredibly painful realization for a lot of them. And when they recognize it, when they recognize that the media failed them, that the experts failed them, that their educators failed them, they're going to start looking around for what actually worked. And the question is, will you be that person? Will you be that couple? Will you be that family? Will you be the one that shows them that there is redemption, that there is restoration? That what we're talking about here is not just some theory, it actually works because God designed it to. And it can be difficult, and it can be painful at times, but the one thing it always is absolutely worth it. Be those people, and we win in a generation. Thank you.